I'm really flattered to actually be asked to be speaking, because I was reading like the list of, before and after me, and it was Dr. So-and-so of so-and-so and does this X research, and I was like, cool, Dr. So-and-so, she does these amazing things. Will Johnston, Tiny House Atlanta. So I'm just going to make myself an honorary doctor of tiny house ideology today. So I'm Will Johnston, Executive Director of Tiny House Atlanta, and how this is going to go today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me, Tiny House Atlanta, what we do, and then go into more defining like what is a tiny houser, who wants this, why do we want this, and then bring in the whole farming aspect and conversation. I do want this to be an ebb and flow conversation with all of you, because what's hilarious about this is we are still at the beginning. This movement is still so new. Cities don't know what to do with it. Towns don't know what to do with it. Counties don't know what to do with it, because people are looking for another option in housing. And I say that because it's not just the tiny house movement, it's innovative housing. Why are we making life so expensive when we just want to exist and have a good time? So why can't we work this out so we have better options for more attainable housing and being able to do more with less? So to start off, oops, click on it, there we go. So to start off, 3 years ago, I just quit corporate America. I said, bye, done. I was like, this is not my life. I'm not connected to it. Even though I had the life that everyone said I should have. I was marketed to. I said, you need this car, you need this condo, you need to live in this city, you need to have these types of friends. And I said, no, I'm not connecting with my life. So quit job, sold 3/4 of everything, even my brand new car, and I went to New Zealand backpacking, and I worked on vineyards. So, 3 months of just being, if you haven't been to New Zealand, go to New Zealand. It's amazing. I came back to Atlanta, and these questions started popping up in my head saying, all right, what do I do now with nothing? I didn't feel the pressure of having to pay a huge mortgage or a car note or all these things. But I had the time to say, okay, what do I want to do now? And when I came across this movement, the tiny house movement, more questions popped up saying, okay, who would people become if they didn't have to worry about their mortgage? What would people do in their community if they had time to give back instead of keep up with the Joneses? So these types of questions started flooding through my brain, just wondering, like, how could we implement this type of housing as a valid option in all aspects of life? And so that's what prompted a lot of this. I would even say it's research, from taking surveys to just getting people's feedback. The idea of how to incorporate tiny house into everyday life is quite remarkable. So 3 years ago, roughly 3 years ago, this July will be 3 years for Tiny House Atlanta's existence, I started Tiny House Atlanta. And what we do is work towards to make people see tiny houses and micro-living as a viable option in everyday use, in everyday life. Because we see the value in less space, more life. We were talking about it earlier, the whole idea of a small space propels you outwards, propels you to go do other things. The idea of having less but having more of a life, the definition of happiness is not stuff. It is experiences and it's people. And that's what we're trying to get back to. It is that community aspect. So how do you do research around community? How do you do research on small spaces? I mean, it's not like we invented this right now. It's like we came off the boat. We did not build 2,600 square foot homes. We built 10 by 14 cabins. That's a tiny house. But obviously our lives are much different. So now here we are in 2017, and we have X amount of housing options. And so Tiny House Atlanta talks to governments, talks to municipalities, and talks to the public of saying, you might not want a tiny house, but this group does. And we're not saying it's for everybody, but it should be seen as a legitimate option. So, the movement itself. Jay Schaefer, I guess you could say, I mean, even though this has been around for a while, cabins and cozy cabins and cottages, it's been around since the first movement of tiny houses was around in '94. The idea of the tiny house movement is 3 buckets. Does anyone kind of know what those buckets are of why someone wants to live in a tiny house or a smaller space? Cost, finance, saving money. That's one. Environment, sustainable living. Mobility, it's definitely part of it. Last one is time. Time back, time to you. Instead of working 40 hours a week, maybe work 20. Still pay for and save for the life you want to live. So again, going back to that questions in my mind, who would you become? What job would you pursue if you knew you only had to spend $400 a month on all your bills and costs? It's a great question. I mean, you could still make $100,000 a year and still live in $400 off of $400 a month. I'd be traveling a lot. But it's that whole idea of sustainable living, reducing your carbon footprint, having more time, and your finances. So, I got ahead of myself. All right, so now we've got the interest. So we've got the whys. We got a lot of people interested in why they want to live tiny. But who do you think is interested in this movement?
I think generally when you watch like the tiny house hunters on TV, generally they're younger couples looking to do this.
Okay, younger couples, so millennials, you would say. All right. Any other guesses?
There are a lot of retirees that are downsizing.
Retirees downsizing, okay. Any other guesses? All right, so just curious, has everyone seen a tiny house show? No. Has anyone actually seen a tiny house? Yes. Does everyone, okay, question, how do you define a tiny house? Is it on wheels? Is it foundational? Is it the space? It's hypothetical. Because, you know, we say tiny houses are under 500 square feet. Some people say 400 square feet. So the definition is it's a small space, whether, you know, on foundation or wheels. So the reason I put this lovely image up there is because, you know, the interest, exactly who people said, millennials and retirees. This is Iris. I just think she's hilarious because she's a New York fashion icon. So I just selected her. But actually, we did a survey. Close to 900 people took this survey from our festival. And this is the age of interest. So yes, you still have the 25 to 29-year-olds, this column. But if you look at 30 to 35, 35 to 40, 40 to 45, 45 to 50, 50 to 55, that's not much difference. So I was really hoping I would be able to define what a tiny house person looked like, a person who wanted to downsize, a person who wanted to be minimalist. But in fact, it's all age groups. And what's funny is now 60 to 70 or 60 and older, you know, that's getting down a little bit less. So even though I do have a lot of retirees, I have a lot of women who come up to me and say, look, you know what I want? I want a tiny house and I want a community garden. And I get that a lot. And that's still in the, you know, high range of interest, obviously with the 25 to 29-year-olds. Yes, with a lot of the shows, you see those rambunctious, energetic millennials like, I'm going to win the day. And it's great. It's great television. But it's also just like some other stories, they don't end up that great after the show's done. Because some things might have not been thought through, financing, insurance, how they're going to pay for it. So it's just like those extreme home makeover shows sometimes where they don't always end up happy. But people just need to think through what they want and then make a plan and work towards it.
Did you happen to find out were they single people? You know, I have a hard time believing when we get into, like the
The-
30, that those are people that don't.
I would have to look at my research, so I just pulled these from our Qualtrics, so I could definitely look at that. I'm trying to remember if we did ask if it was single or coupled.
Oh, or kids.
Or kids.
Like kids. Yeah.
With kids, yeah.
That's especially.
Yeah. 500 feet with kids would be a recipe for insanity.
So we were also curious of what type of professional, is it a professional, is it an hourly worker? We wanted to know what other groups were interested in this. So we went age, and this is pay. So the purple is salary, 41.74% of our group. So we were really amazed by this. So a lot of professionals want to live tiny. And then you've got hourly, contract, freelance, not currently earning an income, monthly payments, retirement pension, almost 8%. So again, we were just really excited, Tane, this is our first survey, just to understand, like, what do people look like when they're wanting to downsize? So this is the group's monthly spending. So the majority spend $1,000 to $2,000 a month, average.
Everything or
Bills, monthly spending, including bills. So, mortgage or rent, bills. I don't think we included like, grocery shopping, stuff like that, but just utilities and rent. And then we asked the same group how much they want, if they go tiny, how much they thought they would be spending a month. And it's the $1 to $500 or $500 to $1,000. So again, we just really were trying to understand this whole idea of like the whole saving money, what it meant to them, and what type of groups were really interested in this movement. Okay, so styles. Foundation and wheels. And just curious, who wants to live in a tiny, or if you do, tiny house on wheels? Just curious. One or two. Foundation? Okay. So I always ask that in every group I talk to, because roughly I get the same response. It's usually about a 25-75% split of interest. 25 or more want the wheels and the mobility, and 75% want foundational and permanency. The average, another part of the survey we did was we asked, if you wanted a tiny house on foundation, what size are you looking at? Is it 250 square feet or under 1,000? Like, tell us what. So the sweet spot for a tiny house on foundation is between 400 to 600 square feet. That's what interests them. And one of our projects that I'll talk to is we have a range from 250 square feet on foundation all the way up to 1,000 with a 500 square foot model and a 750 model. So in the wheels, though, I've seen tiny houses as small as 98 square feet all the way up to 325, but the average of what people look for is around 250 square feet for a tiny house on wheels. Also, we ask people where they want to put it, because, location, location, location. We were talking about this earlier too, that the elephant in the room is you still have to spend money. Unfortunately, there's still that money component that people forget that the tiny house movement still is applied to. Whether you're going to build it yourself, you got to buy stuff. You got to buy the right things. I know you see I built my tiny house for $5,000 and I salvaged all this wood. That's great. But we want to also promote safety. We want to promote that you do not build your own death trap. So it's the idea of doing it right and not cutting corners. And also knowing what you can do where. So Tiny House Atlanta did a feasibility study with the City of Atlanta and South Face this year. And we picked different neighborhoods of where we thought it would be feasible for tiny houses to be developed. And that would have to be tiny houses on foundation. The strategy is tiny houses on foundation first, and then we can start squeaking in the wheels. Because we need people to see, feel, touch a smaller space. People still think it's a stigma. If they see small space, they think poor, they think trash, they think, oh, that's going to bring down the value of my house. It's really fascinating just to watch the the reaction of people when you say tiny houses, because everyone thinks tiny houses are on wheels when they're not. So if you wanted a tiny house in an urban setting, we're thinking of, well, I'll get into that in a little bit. One second.
That's a quick question.
Yes.
And you may get here, so feel free to put me off. But
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you're talking about that space, like what the current laws are around having tiny houses, because I've heard kind of mixed things.
So zoning and codes is local.
Okay.
Even though it starts at the state, but all zoning and codes are adopted locally, meaning they will decide what they feel is the right zoning and codes for safety and regulations for that area. So what's different from the city of Atlanta is different from Clarkston, which is different from Athens, which is different. So it's like
There's nothing at the state level that says yay or nay.
So we are working with the state. We actually just submitted the IRC appendix that the tiny house group submitted for the national IRC, or is it IBC? I just lost it. Anyways, they submitted how tiny houses can be adopted on a national level. We took that, edited it, and submitted it to the state of Georgia. It's up for review this May. So, but the thing is though, they still see tiny houses on wheels as RVs, and you cannot live in an RV within a metropolitan city. That's a fact. But we need people to see them in a different light, to create a different appendix, to create a different category, because I see tiny houses on wheels as functional 365 year-round homes. They're just on wheels. They're not necessarily RVs. They're built completely different than an RV, even though it is a compact space. Now, the rules we submitted right now, I believe the state of Georgia is under the 2012 International Building Codes, and they would adopt this appendix, which would allow a space. So for example, the city of Atlanta, there is no minimum square footage, but there's minimum room size. So the first room you have to build on your house is 120 square feet. If you add a kitchen, you have to add X amount. If you add a bathroom, you have to add more. So the house keeps growing. So what we have submitted is to allow that space to start at 70 square feet instead of 120. So you can hit a smaller, tinier footprint on foundation than starting at 120 square feet. So the state of Georgia, that we don't seem to be getting any pushback. They see this as a positive. There's a lot of modular builders that we are looking at partnering with to see if they could change some of their designs to incorporate stick built, so they could start creating these tiny houses that will be inspected at on site and then delivered, already inspected, ready to go. There's your house, put it down on foundation. So there is talk at state level of embracing the tiny house movement, which is very exciting. Going back to the groups of asking them where they want their tiny house. It was very interesting. It's kind of almost quarterly even, where 213 want to be urban. They want to be in the city. It's that walkable, sustainable feeling. They want to be close to shops, restaurants, and whatnot. 197 want to be in suburbia. I don't know why. 214 want the mix of between either being the small town rural or on the perimeters of a small town, still have access to, be close by. And then 144 want to be completely rural, and 50 just don't know where they want their tiny house. And that's a big question. If you are wanting to design or live in a tiny house, you have to ask where you want to live, because it's going to be much cheaper to go here than here to urban. Because again, land, you got to buy land or you got to rent land. That's just a huge factor. It's the elephant in the room that people don't like to discuss, that will probably deter you in some areas to move to or take your house to. Going back to your other question about, there are also ways that we're looking at bringing back accessory dwelling units as well as carriage houses in the city of Atlanta. And that's another aspect that would allow people to create density. So the city of Atlanta has put out that they're going to grow by, let's see, they're at 450 or 500,000, and they're going to hit 1.2 million in 20 years. And that's not all going to be on high rises. So we have a lot of big backyards. we have a lot of space, and it's time we think through how to really utilize that space.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the tiny houses that are on wheels, what are you doing will it be like a trailer court, because you have utility hookups and things of that sort? And what do you do for like tornadoes and, what?
So they do have different, so again, this is still brand new. There are people that have bought RV parks and are turning them into tiny house on wheel parks, or just tiny house communities, just for wheeled. But what I also like to see is more mix where we're going. So this is the project that we're working on in East Point. Excuse me. So this is what I mentioned earlier. This has, I think this one has 50, but we had to bring it down to 40. But this ranges from 250 square feet to 1,000. And there's certain numbers of 250, 500, 750, and 1,000. Obviously, the upper part is what I really like the best, and this part we have reworked because this is too linear for me. Again, there's something more to this movement than just living in a cool small space. It's about community, it's about urban planning, it's really understanding how to position your house well, instead of just line, front door, street facing, blah, 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 boring, boring, boring. So this is allowing us to create mini hamlets with your neighbors that open up into the bigger neighborhood. And this would be, you would own the land collectively, you'd have a community garden, and you'd have a community center. So again, it's that intentional living, intentional community that a lot of the tiny house community is looking for. Actually, a lot of people are looking for. So this is one example, but going to the wheel thing, we see this doing this first, and then suddenly lots are going to be opened up for tiny houses on wheels. So again, that 25-75% ratio of you have 75% foundational, and then 25% you have slabs that people can pull right up. And there are, I believe, what I've seen is the tornado attachments. Basically, it's connecting them straight to the ground. That allows them to be more structured and more unmovable. I've also seen people use decks as attaching them and also locking them, because safety and theft is also an option, or a kind of a bad thing for tiny houses on wheels, because people can pull your house away. So you have to really think through wheel locks. I mean, I hate saying you have to, but unfortunately we are in a society that people are going to unfortunately do that. So we've got that. This is again, what we feel is a good urban model. So you also see that we also call this pocket neighborhoods. And I was also talking about the accessory dwelling units, carriage houses, and intentional communities. The pocket neighborhoods, we're looking at maybe a small plot of land, maybe a half acre, to be able to put 8 houses on, which again allows for an intentional community right within a neighborhood, and allows you to get in a small space and live that experiential life that you want within a city. And then you've got rural, which that's pretty much self-explanatory. You're able to have a nice patch of land, whether it be by a lake or by a creek or just wherever you want. But then you do have to play the zoning and code game. Each county, you do have to look. Some counties in Georgia, there are no zoning and codes, so you don't have to worry about it. You can just build, you can just have, and there you are, you exist. But you're probably going to be in the middle of nowhere. If you need more people interaction, then you might not want to go that route. But when you go rural, usually you could find that farm or a patch of land that allows you to rent or buy, and then you're able to put your house on and start existing. But you need to think through water. Are you off grid? Is it solar? Are you connected to some sort of sewer? So again, it depends what type of tiny house you want, whether you're using a compost toilet, a regular toilet, or the toilet we have is called a separate, which diverts number 1 from number 2. It's a no, it's not necessarily a composting. Basically, It dehydrates, number 2, because it's 75% water. And then after a month, you just tie up the liner and you throw it away just like you do with your dog food. So, and it's completely legal. And that's another thing, legality. Also, what's a fascinating read is, I'm sure you've probably heard, is Humanure. I find it a fun read. I know that's weird to say, but it's a fascinating read because we need to take a look at it back. But that's another time. All right, so let's get into farming and tiny houses. So I gave you a quick little synopsis. I know that the reason for the season is now what we're going to talk about. What the heck does tiny houses have to do with farming? And what could they have to do with farming? And I thought about this, and so I talked to, Georgia Organics. I talked to my sister's a sustainable farmer, so I just sat on the phone, actually sat with her over Christmas, and I was like, so what would you do with a tiny house? And so what's kind of fun is there is no research. There is no right or wrong answer for this, but being able to incorporate the 3 buckets of sustainability, sustainable living, time, money, mobility, how would we apply this to farming practices? And I'm going to throw that to you all. Does anyone have a guess?
Inexpensive housing for people who are working at the farm.
Workforce housing. Workforce housing. Good. Anyone else?
Sure, allowing sort of newer, small farmers to potentially get started if you could get access.
So startup farming.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Fragmentation.
Say again?
Land fragmentation.
Land fragmentation? What do you mean by that?
Like in Georgia, in the southeast, I heard you have legacy issues where the land is getting broken up into tiny plots, particularly in certain communities. And in the developing world, that's even more intense, where the farmer might have 4 or 5 children, and then 1 acre becomes tiny.
Gotcha.
So
along, all of those are right. I mean, there is no wrong answer. And the more I kept thinking about, well, what else could this be used for? Because, Jessica, as we were talking earlier, how do you get started as a farmer? Obviously you need land. You need a house. You need to start working the land. And you also are going to decide what type of farmer you're going to be. Are you organic? Are you pasture? Or is it sustainable? What's the level? There's levels, right? There's
Well, maybe not levels,
but
types.
The types, yes.
Horizontally,
Horizontally. Yes.
I mean, you could be conventional, organic, certified naturally grown, and that would be vegetable oriented, or you could be, what you're saying, pasture, which would be animal, grazing based.
So when I got into talking to the different groups, so first one is what you said, is being able to utilize a tiny house as a farmhouse, which Georgia Organics and U Garden just did this past weekend, and they did it last year as well. So what are the benefits? So let's say I have a pasture raising, or a farmer that does pasture, where they rotate everything? They just keep rotating. Rotational grazing, but then also crop rotation and graze rotation, right? So, all right, let's say you have this piece of land. It's in the middle of over here. Like, all right, we've got it. It's a good price. We can get this. This house is only say $50,000. That way it gives you the ability to be on site. And if you think about it, the mobility, you could move with your crops and your animals. I mean, knowing that your house could keep moving and rotate on an acre farm. I was actually going in so nerd mode. I was looking at what an acre can yield, and then all that fun stuff. So I just love the idea of being able to say, okay, one of the first options for tiny houses on farming is the mobility of utilizing a tiny house on wheels. You could focus on your farm. You could save money on your bills. You could basically have no bills if you're off grid. It all depends on where you live and what you're allowed. And also you have to look at the regulations, because I know, and I'll get to this later, my sister has to follow a certain set of rules because she does boilers. And so, what you're allowed to feed them, what you need to do with them, what they are allowed to be near. So knowing that, again, comparing and contrasting of what a tiny house life is like, as well as what you need to do to keep clean and fresh on your farm.
How efficient would that be though? Because you have to set up, all your utilities and you have to set up, your
Well, if you're
handling and everything.
True, and if you're off grid, again, this is where you would have to look into that. If there is a well on site, if there is a structure that already is on site that has a sewer, or you need to put in a sewer, or it's a composting toilet. These are the things that still need to be determined. Any other comments on the tiny farmhouse? Yep.
I guess I feel like when you're farming, you have to have a lot of stuff for infrastructure and where to store feed or, fertilizers, all that kind of stuff. So what do you think about that in terms of you still need structures or space to store all the farming?
Funny enough, I'm going to get to that in the scenarios.
All right.
Well, and there's the famous picture of Alex Hitt. How many of you all heard him? They started in a tent.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Because they wanted to farm so badly. So, and they knew they couldn't afford to put a bunch of money into a house.
Right.
So they put their money into what you just said, the tools, a shed for the tools, all of that. And they literally lived in a canvas tent for, I think it was longer than 8 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
It might
dedication.
have been 8 months without running water, and then they were doing irrigation themselves, and then it was
right.
Gotcha.
So that's how they bootstrap them their way up. So something.
And these can be very, I don't want to say boot, but I mean, you see the luxury tiny houses that are being produced on TV. They don't have to come out at that level. They can range in price, but also if they wanted, and that's up to the farmer too. If they wanted at least a structure to live in to get started, I mean, I always say the tiny house, we are in an age that we are not like our grandparents, where my grandparents lived in their house for 50 plus years. We don't do that anymore. Structures ebb and flow out of our lives. And this could be in your life for 2 years. It could be in it for 5. It could be in it for 1. Heck, half a year. A day. You might not like it. I don't know. But being able to utilize a small space like a tiny house and get you to the next level. Maybe it's a stepping stone for you. But again, having that option to be able to use. And maybe it is a rental. Maybe it's 200. We're still at the beginning of people having just these, oh yeah, I've got 5 tiny houses in the back. Just take a look. We're not there yet. The second one someone mentioned is workforce housing. So I have a friend who has a New York dairy farm, and they provide all housing for their workers. They get paid $50,000 a year. They work 60 hours a week, 12-hour days, and they provide housing and insurance for them. There's dedication to their staff. But they live in mobile trailers. So the quality of that life of, instead of a foundational tiny house, I see it as a positive, building something like this. This is actually in Texas, where a group of friends, I use this picture because I love it. It's a group of friends that were just like, oh, we want to downsize and we all want to live near each other. And they're retiring. So it's this beautiful tiny house row in some town in Texas that, they just did a great job in utilizing their space. So again, the whole workforce housing, you have that option of the seasonal labor to come in. They're on site. They're there. It's an added protection to have them there, but also it gives them the space. They're not up in your biz.
Well, actually now, because we are going to have a ginormous labor shortage.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong, your vegetables are going up. So
Yes.
milk, so are eggs, chickens, everything. And to get the visas that you need to have temporary ag workers, I'm pretty sure you have to supply housing.
Yeah.
I can't remember their H something. Do you remember what the H something visas?
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
That's actually a great point.
There's a particular
Temporary worker.
Yeah, temporary worker visa, and they're not easy for people to get. Not easy for the farmer to
Attain.
to get through all the paperwork to get them. But I'm pretty sure that they have to
Provide
supply
housing.
housing.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Wish I could, well.
They already are.
Well, and it's, I mean,
Many people are, yeah.
and there are all these debates about whether that actually lets people move to better jobs and new opportunities, or whether they're stuck. But nevertheless, that is going to be the policy going forward.
Yes. So the last one that no one mentioned, but it's kind of what the all craze is right now, is basically agritourism, staying in a tiny house. So if you are a strawberry farmer, or you are a certain type of crop that only is certain types of seasons, and you need to make X amount of money to help make sure the next season goes well, having a number of these, so let's say workforce housing, okay, you got them working and living there, but then when these are empty, you're able to Airbnb them, give people an experience, and provide more income to your farm. This is probably booming in a different way right now because people have tiny houses and they're always booked. I just stayed in one for Valentine's Day. I mean, and that was in Cabbagetown. Actually, it was an accessory dwelling unit, and I paid $100 for it. $100 a night. I mean, that is income that could be to your farm or to farmers, whether it be, you know, a couple of them, but there is work behind it, obviously, because you still have to clean, make it look nice, and provide whatever you say is on Airbnb or whatever you feel. But it does give you another outlet to income to bring in to support your farm. Okay, so scenarios. This is, I believe, an acre farm. Again, I'm obsessed with the acre farm. I don't know why. But the whole idea of being able to put a tiny house on an acre farm, I see this playing out in urban areas. Because you think of the food deserts, you think of people needing fresh produce. And I know there are a couple farms in Atlanta, but I know that they're not able to stay on their land. So being able to have a tiny house on wheels or a small tiny structure where their farm is, to be able to be there, being, I guess, the protector, the whole idea of, all right, here we have this house, it's on this land, we're growing food for the community. It's really more of a community nonprofit angle to really bring in awareness of growing your own food. Has anyone seen that? Comment? Yep.
No, but if you have an acre farm, you have got to get that cow-calf pair out of there because there's no way you'll see cow-calf pair.
I love it. I pull a pic
Or
from
the
an internet.
pigs. That's right. Sorry.
Keep the chickens. All right.
Maybe the chickens, but the pigs
But
and
these, all
cows.
right,
they
ignore
gotta
this.
get
Ignore this.
Let's stay. Let's stay.
Perfect. Now I know. We're all learning. Another scenario or another, well, the tiny dog house. And I want, what was your name? Emma? Do you want to say a couple words about it? Because I don't know if people knew, but like you guys are doing this. So like I was mentioning to people like, wait, what? UGarden's doing it with what? What's going on? So the fact that, you know, UGA, you have a tiny house course. And you partner with UGarden and Georgia Organics, and they just gave, what is it, this tiny house? Okay, good. This tiny house to a organic farmer couple, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So do you want to say a couple words on that?
Not like you got it, or
Just what, so the whole process, where it's going to be located, and the point of giving them this house.
So yeah, the house, we got to build it over the course of last semester. It was a FHC class. It was really great. But the farmer who was getting it, which is really fun because I knew her, has a farm, Ladybug Farms up in Clayton. And so she is getting it as soon as they work out like paperwork stuff. And I think her long-term goal is to use it as a home to like host like a farm camp type thing for adults. I want to learn more about farming, but it's not going to be like a farm vacation. They're going to be coming and helping her. So
Kind of like wolfing?
yeah, anyway. So
That's a little bit better, probably.
yes, it's pretty nice on the inside. So
But so are they planning on living in it at first?
I think she already has the house.
Okay.
So,
Very cool.
so probably intern housing for a while. maybe.
Intern housing, great. So that's the Tiny Dog House. You can go to tinydoghouse.com and see pictures and the blog and just all the stuff that they worked on this year. So I was really happy to. I gave a talk for Kim Scoba 3 weeks ago at one of their forums, and so I'm hoping to do more work with them. And then, so here's the other thing that you were talking about, farm in a box. So when we think of space utilization, okay, let's throw out the house. What else do we need to make it a compact space utilized unit that allows people to flourish from? Small space pushes us forward. So this is Farm in a Box. This is I don't know if they're a nonprofit, but this is focusing on third world countries. So everything comes in that shipping container. You've got your solar power, you've got your greenhouse, all your tools, everything is orchestrated in this farmhouse, or basically farm in a box. And you do have to dig the well, you do have to do, do have to prep the land, but it's giving someone, a group, a community, everything they need in a contained unit, dropped off, and that's their barn. So now imagine tiny house, one of these, and you're ready to go. Now, I don't know what that type of an investment would be, because maybe a tiny house and a farm in a box is $150,000. So you're paying a note on that group versus, figuring out staying in a tent, things like that. So being able to provide different options for startups, I think that would be amazing. Again, what I love about this movement is space utilization, making one thing two things, making a desk a chair, making a bed your dining room table. I don't know. But it's the idea of knowing that we're able to design and build and make things more efficiently and save a lot of space. So the last thing, working housing. So actually, I'll talk on this. So I just came back from Tanzania. I was there for 3 weeks over January, and we built these structures. We built 10 structures in 10 days, and these are called abode structures. They're out of a firm out of Iowa, and it's an arch structure, and it's basically this: steel arch, interior wooden composite cladding, insulation on top of that, and then metal corrugated roofing. And you can see a better basically what it looks like here. So it's on a cement slab. So you pour the cement, you drill in the arches, you put everything up. I mean, you can build one of these literally in a day. Now, can we do that in America? No, because zoning and regulations, we don't want you to die. Again, comparing, like trying to give people one thing, but we can't do anything because we have to get permitting, making sure that it's a viable certain type of structure. So there are obstacles, and I am actually hoping to work out something with a farm in California with Abode, that they want to do this workforce housing. They're trying to think through the experience, and it's, again, agritourism, people coming up from LA, wanting to stay the weekend, learn, be a part of, work a little for their food. So I was there, and what they do with what they're doing is this is male dormitories, female dormitories, and then cook and educators, all on a 40-acre farm in Buguni, just outside of Arusha. I expect you to know where that is in Tanzania. So it was just very fascinating. Again, this cool small space, being able to be put up in 10 days to allow the community to flourish. Also, what's on this property is an orphanage, a school, and basically an on-site dormitory for NGOs to come and be able to do work in the area. And that's where I stayed while we built these. So the last scenario I'm going to introduce you to, okay, this is my sister. This is my sister and her family in Western Pennsylvania. They have three main sources of income with their farm. They do broiler chickens, they have eggs, and then they grow produce for local restaurants and resorts in the area. And I sat down with them and I just talked with them and I tried to understand what would they do with a tiny house? What would they need out of a tiny house? And it came to workforce housing. It came to the idea of interns. It came to the idea of education. How do you let someone have access to what we're doing, stay the night, be a part of it, and not be in my space, but also be able to utilize the fact that it's on wheels, because then you don't have to go through a permitting process as well as get things stamped and approved. So if they're able to have a tiny house on wheels that's set up in an area that is safe for woofers. Does anyone know what woofing is? There's a couple people. Okay, majority of you know. Worldwide opportunities for organic farming. That's how I found my way to New Zealand and working on vineyards. So just letting you know. It's a fun time. And so they saw it as an opportunity to also provide housing for, because they also focus on, they do a mission to help men who had substance abuses. So being able to have them on site, live on site, the workers there, being able to mentor them in as being a part of their community, and always have access to the farm. And that's what they felt like the best scenario for a tiny house would be. And it wouldn't have to be a full-fledged bathroom shower, where they would have bathroom and shower provided on another basically outhouse and restroom area. So it was just fascinating, the fact that they are looking for that, but they are also looking at the agritourism. People are fascinated by where their food comes from, and they want to see, feel, touch. They want to understand where it's coming from. So they're trying to figure out how that's all going to work in the next couple of years. So my last question to you all, where else could this go? We've talked about housing for working. We've talked about tiny farmhouse, starting off your farm. We've talked about subsidizing income to give farmers more income over their full year of growing. Are there any other ideas? That's what's exciting about this. This is still brand new. People still are trying to understand how to utilize this movement to wherever they are in life. Anyone else have another idea of what came up? Pop in your head. Any idea? Bueller? Oh wow, good people. Some got that reference. Good. Yes.
I was thinking, because my friend she's looking into buying a house, and then she was thinking a while ago about getting a tiny house and putting it in Athens, and then she ran into all the stumbling blocks that you mentioned, and I feel like a lot of them have to do with stigma around mobile homes. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if there's any way that maybe this movement could help see that in a different light and make it so that it's kind of building solidarity also for people who can't afford a big house. Yep. So tiny house people tend to be more middle, upper income who are looking at downsizing versus people who have no other options. Not completely.
And that is true, but also where I have to be very careful, because I have a lot of people wanting me to build tiny house villages just for homeless. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm trying to make it seen as an option for everyone. Mm-hmm. I think the people who are looking at it like, oh, this is a way to get me on the right track, I think that's definitely a viable solution for them. Now, is it the right solution? I don't know. Because you're also shoving someone in 250 square feet that they might not agree with. So saying, well, you had some unfortunate turn of events in your life, well, here's this house that will get you back on track. It might not work for them. But, Salt Lake City, Utah, I believe, built giant apartment complexes for the entire homeless population and got them off the street overnight. And it's working. So there are different solutions for every different scenario. But I do agree, for the stigma, I gave a talk at Keep Georgia Beautiful last year. And I had a father come up to me afterwards and say, thank you. Because I don't see these tiny homes as a sentence to be poor. I see it as a sentence of freedom. I see it as a way to go find yourself. I see it as a way to be able to propel yourself forward in a wonderfully constructed space. And he came up and he said, thank you, because I thought my daughter was throwing her life away. And it's going out and talking. It's doing exactly what I'm doing today. I know it's not for everybody, but it should be a part of the options that we have in housing. And so whether it be utilized for farming or utilized for downtown development, I don't know. I mean, neighborhood revitalization, there's so many different projects that Tiny House Atlanta I want to take on, because I am looking at neighborhood revitalization. If we're able to plot down 8 tiny houses on wheels in a neighborhood that doesn't have a strong community, and the people that are in those homes are assigned to really get the neighborhood going, why not? Let's try it. So how else can we utilize this movement to make our world better? Anyone? Yeah.
You were saying before we got started that some of the minimum, square foot requirements
Yes.
are concerns by the county or city officials that these will not generate enough economic or enough taxes to pay for the services. So I'm sure that must change depending on where you are.
Again, local, yes.
But have you seen any research on kind of what those breakpoints are? What do you
minimum square footage, or
no, in terms of the minimum amount of taxes something has to generate to pay for police,
Residential's a loss. That's all Dorfman's work.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I thought.
It's a
All of
loss.
it
And
was
for
a
most part,
loss.
I mean, it's really high, like Cherokee County minimum is 450,000. Then add schools on top of that. Those studies that he does, cost of community services, don't even count.
So no matter what residential has.
Pretty close, but it's not about that. It's about your proper mix of green space, industrial, commercial, and residential. And every community is different. What's the consistency is, it's very rare that you can get a community that residential does not cause
a loss.
As a loss.
So the argument then that a tiny house is a loss is a little false, although it may be a greater loss than a larger.
But it doesn't matter. The size of the house is irrelevant, right?
Well, but they tax it based on square footage, right?
But you still, for every residential building you put in there, you have to deal with sewer, water, garbage, police. The advantage of tiny houses is chances are there's no kids, so you don't. It reduces your schools. But every single one of those, that's like a fixed cost per house.
That's what I'm saying, right? And so if you're taxing it on square footage, you may be bringing in less. But at the same time, if you're putting 3 or 4 structures on the same
lot, exactly,
then potentially it's
maybe where you find it better is multifamily housing, non-mobile homes actually come closer to breaking even. So like in fact, all these big apartment complexes that are going around everywhere in town are actually going to break even or will be there. But they do. It's better to do that with students, to put them into high-rises apartments than to put them out in the landscape, right? Yeah. So
and that's what
density actually takes you to a point where you can hit your cost of can at least get close to break even on cost of community services from residential.
And I completely agree with it. It's strategy. Like, does that make sense? I mean, does it make sense? Because we're working on our project with East Point. We have a 7.6 acre parcel. It's a quarter mile away from MARTA, quarter mile away from downtown, and we're only able to use about 3.5 acres of it. But it still brings in 40 individual homes. And we're able to go use it as a PUD, which is a planned unit development. And so, which allows us to go smaller than the minimum square foot requirement, which was 900 square feet in East Point. So that allowed us to start at a smaller space. Now, again, I'm learning that I have to work very close with city council. I am a politician. I have to be upfront with them, and they have to tell me what their fears are. And it is trailer park, desolate place. It's going to turn into. But then I get the extreme, like you're going to gentrify us, you're going to kick us out. It's going to be bad. So it's a yin and a yang. It's a double-edged sword that I'm trying to see if we can get one done and then snowball and learn from that, because no one has done this. Actually build a tiny house development. West Coast, they're working on them. They're much farther along than we are, but we're going to try to be